Hello, my friends. Welcome to your story for sleep. In this channel, you listen to beautiful confessions of love in the rain. I am thrilled to have you here. Now close your eyes and let's go to the land of dreams where love is.
The moment I saw her standing there, soaked from the rain, I realized some people never really leave you. They live in the spaces between your thoughts, in the silence before sleep, in the way you hesitate before saying, "I love you," to someone new. For 10 years, I convinced myself I had moved on. I built a life, a career, a future with someone else. I told myself that what Elena and I had was just young love. Intense, messy, unsustainable. I told myself I made the right choice when I left. But the human heart doesn't operate on logic. It doesn't file away the past in neat folders and close them forever. And standing there in that coffee shop, watching water drip from her dark hair onto the hardwood floor, I felt every carefully constructed wall I'd built come crashing down. Because some people don't just leave your life. They leave an imprint, a shape, and you spend years trying to fill that space with anything, anyone that might fit. But nothing ever does. Not completely. Not the way they did. I didn't know it then, but seeing Elena again would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, about choice, about who I'd become. This isn't a story about rekindling old flames. It's about discovering that some fires never really go out. They just burn underground, waiting. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 34 years old, and I'm an architect. Not the struggling artist type. I'm successful. Partner at a respected firm in the city. I design buildings that reshape skylines, spaces where people live their entire lives. There's something satisfying about creating permanence in a world that feels increasingly temporary. It was a Thursday evening in late October, the kind of autumn day where the rain starts around 3 and doesn't stop, where the temperature drops just enough that you can see your breath mixing with the steam from your coffee. I'd ducked into Meridian Coffee, this upscale place near my office with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of spot where a cappuccino costs $8 and somehow feels worth it. I was engaged, 3 months engaged to Jessica Park, a pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a laugh that made everyone around her feel safe. We were planning a spring wedding, small, elegant, everything in its right place. My life was orderly, predictable, good. The coffee shop was warm, insulated from the storm outside. Rain drummed against the tall windows, creating rivers of light from the street lamps. The air smelled like espresso and cinnamon, with that undertone of wet wool from people's coats. Jazz played softly through hidden speakers. It was peaceful, normal. I had no reason to think that in 60 seconds, my carefully ordered world would tilt on its axis. I was scrolling through my phone, half reading an email from a client, when the bell above the door chimed. Cold air rushed in. I looked up out of habit the way you do in public spaces. That's when time fractured. She was standing just inside the entrance, shaking rain from her umbrella. Dark hair longer than I remembered, falling past her shoulders in damp waves. She wore a charcoal coat, professional but elegant, and there was something about the way she moved, careful, deliberate, like someone who'd learned to take up less space than they deserved. But it was her eyes that stopped my breath. Those eyes. After 10 years, I knew them instantly. Deep brown, almost black in certain light, with flecks of amber that caught the glow of the Edison bulbs. Eyes that used to look at me like I was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Eyes I'd seen filled with laughter, with tears, with a love so consuming it terrified me. Elena Reyes. She wasn't alone. A younger woman stood beside her, mid-20s, similar features, clearly related. They were talking quietly, and Elena hadn't seen me yet. She was gesturing with her free hand, saying something that made her companion smile. My heart hammered against my ribs. Fight or flight response, they call it. Every instinct told me to leave, to grab my coat and slip out the side exit before she noticed me. 10 years of distance, of healing, of moving forward. All of it suddenly felt as fragile as wet paper. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching her like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I had. Then she laughed at something her companion said, and the sound cut through the ambient noise of the coffee shop like a melody I'd forgotten I knew. It was her laugh, unchanged, unmistakable. It carried the same warmth, the same slight rasp at the end. And just like that, she turned her head. Her eyes swept across the room in an idle scan, and then they found mine. The recognition wasn't immediate. There was a beat where her gaze passed over me, where I might have still been a stranger. But then her expression changed. Her eyes widened slightly. Her lips parted. The color drained from her face, then rushed back. We stared at each other across 20 feet of polished floor and scattered tables. The coffee shop sounds faded. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversation, the rain, all of it became background noise to the roaring in my ears. She said something to her companion without breaking eye contact with me. The younger woman glanced in my direction, nodded, then touched Elena's arm gently before heading toward the counter. Elena stood there for a moment longer, and I watched her take a visible breath, steadying herself. Then she started walking toward me. Each step felt like it echoed, like the universe was holding its breath. I stood up without deciding to, my chair scraping against the floor. We met in the middle of the room, between a bookshelf and a table where a couple sat absorbed in their laptops. Up close, I could see the changes. Fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a small scar on her left temple that hadn't been there before. She looked older, of course, but not in a way that diminished her. If anything, there was a depth to her features that made her more striking, like she'd lived through things that had refined rather than worn her down. Marcus, my name in her voice. I'd forgotten how she said it, soft on the first syllable, with a slight emphasis on the second. Elena. I barely recognized my own voice. Wow. Hi. She smiled, but it was tentative, uncertain. This is unexpected. Yeah. I tried to find more words, something articulate, but my mind was blank. Do you live here now, in the city? No, just visiting. I'm only in town for a few days. There was a pause, awkward, weighted. We were strangers who'd once known each other's every secret. The distance between those two realities felt impossible to bridge. She gestured vaguely at my table. Do you have time to talk, just for a minute? I should have said no. I should have made an excuse. Meeting to get to, fiancé expecting me, any of 100 reasonable boundaries I should have maintained. But I looked into those amber-flecked eyes and I said, yes, of course, please. We walked back to my table. I pulled out a chair for her, old habit, and she sat down, draping her coat over the back. The woman she'd come with was at the counter, giving us space. Elena folded her hands on the table. I noticed she wasn't wearing a ring. So, she said softly, 10 years. 10 years, I repeated. And just like that, the past and present collapsed into each other. The life I'd built, the person I'd become, the future I'd planned. All of it suddenly felt like a story someone else had written. Because sitting across from Elena Reyes, I was 24 again, standing at a crossroads, making the choice that defined the next decade of my life. The choice I never stopped questioning. The first minute of conversation was excruciating. We traded the basics like strangers at a networking event. How have you been? Fine, good, you know. Busy. Yeah, I can imagine. The The weather's crazy today. It really is. Meaningless words to fill the chasm between us. Elena's companion, her sister, I'd learn, brought over 2 drinks and set them down with a knowing look. "I'm going to check out that bookstore across the street," she said, squeezing Elena's shoulder. "Text me when you're ready." "Thanks, Carmen." Elena watched her sister leave, then wrapped her hands around her cup. Tea, not coffee. Chamomile, if I had to guess. She'd always said coffee after 4 made her too anxious to sleep. I'd remembered that. After 10 years, I'd remembered that. "Your sister?" I asked. "Yeah. She lives a few hours north. I'm staying with her for a bit." Elena took a sip of her tea, and I watched her hands. They were steady now, but I'd seen them shake when she first sat down. She's been really supportive. Supportive of what? The question came out before I could stop it. Too direct, too soon. But Elena didn't flinch. "Long story," she said quietly. "We'll get there." A woman at the next table laughed at something on her phone, the sound jarring in our bubble of tension. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle, sending water arcing against the window. "You look good," Elena said, and there was something in her voice. Not quite sadness, but close. "Really good. Successful. Like things worked out the way you hoped." I ... I didn't know how to respond to that. "I'm doing okay. I'm a partner at Steinberg and Associates now. We mostly do commercial projects, some residential." "That's amazing, Marcus. You always wanted that. What about you? What are you doing now?" "I'm a doctor. Emergency medicine." She said it simply, without pride or false modesty. Just fact. That's incredible, Elena." And it was. She'd talked about medical school back then, but money had been tight and the path seemed impossible. "When did you..." "Started med school 4 years after you left. Took me a while to get there, but I did." "You left." The words hung in the air. "Not after we broke up. Not after it ended. After you left." I cleared my throat. "I'm engaged." I don't know why I said it. Defense mechanism, maybe. Drawing a line in the sand. Look how far I've moved on. Look how over us I am. Elena's expression shifted. Something flickered across her face too quickly for me to read. Then she smiled, and it looked genuine. "That's wonderful. Congratulations. What's her name?" "Jessica. She's a pediatric surgeon." "A surgeon. Wow. You two must have a lot in common." "We do. She's great. Really great." Elena nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I'm happy for you, Marcus. Truly, you deserve that." The sincerity in her voice almost broke me. There was no bitterness, no resentment. Just honest happiness for someone she used to love. I wanted to ask if there was anyone in her life, if she'd found someone who loved her the way she deserved. But I couldn't form the words. I was afraid of any answer she might give. The coffee shop was starting to empty out. The couple with laptops packed up their things. A barista began wiping down tables. Rain continued its steady percussion against the glass. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said softly. "Of course. Are you happy?" 3 simple words, the most complicated question in the world. I opened my mouth to say yes, to give her the answer that would close this conversation neatly, that would let us both walk away believing we'd made the right choices, that would prove that the past was truly past. But the pause before I answered told her everything. Her eyes held mine, and in them I saw understanding. Not pity, not judgment, just recognition. Like she knew exactly what that hesitation meant because she'd asked herself the same question. "I should be," I finally said. "Everything in my life says I should be." "But are you?" I looked out the window at the rain-soaked street. Headlights blurred into streams of color. People hurried past under umbrellas, heads down, rushing toward warmth and home and whatever awaited them there. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I was. Until about 5 minutes ago. 3 to 5 breaking the ice. The honesty cracked something open between us. The careful politeness fell away and we started talking. Really talking for the first time. Elena told me about her path to medicine, the years she'd spent working 2 jobs to save money, the mountain of student loans, the grueling residency that nearly broke her. She spoke about it matter-of-factly, without seeking sympathy or praise, just explaining how her life had unfolded. I told her about the early years in Barcelona, where I'd gone after leaving her, the architecture firm that had recruited me, the projects that looked glamorous from the outside but left me feeling hollow, how I'd eventually come back to the States, back to this city 3 years ago. We didn't talk about us yet. We circled around it the way you circle a wound that's not quite healed. "Do you still draw?" Elena asked. "Those sketches you used to make on napkins, whatever was around." "Sometimes. Not as much as I should." I'd forgotten that she remembered that. "Do you still write poetry?" "God, no." She laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd heard from her. "Those were terrible. I don't know how you read them with a straight face." "They weren't terrible. They were raw, honest. They were melodramatic college nonsense. They were yours." The words came out softer than I intended. Elena's smile faded slightly, and something more serious settled in her expression. "You always saw me differently than I saw myself," she said quietly. "I saw you clearly. Maybe." A comfortable silence fell between us. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the windows with increased intensity. The few remaining customers in the shop seemed cocooned in their own worlds. A barista yawned behind the counter, checking his watch. "I think about that summer sometimes," Elena said, not looking at me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The one before you left. How young we were. How certain we felt about everything." My chest tightened. "Elena, it's okay. I'm not trying to make this hard. I just mean, we thought we had it all figured out, didn't we? We thought love was enough. It should have been. But it wasn't. Not against everything else. Your career, the distance, timing. All the things that seemed less important than how we felt. I wanted to argue. To say that I'd been wrong, that I should have chosen differently, that the Barcelona opportunity hadn't been worth what I'd lost. But what good would that do? The past was fixed. We couldn't rewrite it. "I used to wonder what you were doing," I admitted, "especially in the first year. I'd see something. A woman with dark hair, a certain laugh, and for a second I'd think it was you." "How long did that last?" "Longer than it should have." Elena looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my breath catch.